stories. China posts inflammatory messages on social media accusing the Philippines of breaking its commitments, playing victim after provocation, and colluding with the U.S.
The country's support system is growing, though, with India promising greater cooperation on the maritime and security front.
And later, we will be speaking with SEIPI President Dan Lachica on the government's efforts to boost the local semiconductor industry, including its recent tapping of Czech companies to invest in the sector.
Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen. And I'm Shawn.
Tonight's big story is actually the continuing saga of the team of Filipino scientists and researchers who were harassed by Chinese vessels both on water and overhead on Saturday.
They were en route to the sandbars known as Sandy Cays within the Pag-asa Island territorial sea when Chinese boats tried to block them. There was also a Chinese Navy helicopter that kept hovering overhead, trying to intimidate the research team.
Now, that incident was caught on video by the researchers themselves, and the footage has just been released. Our reporter, Maritime was there and brings us a first-hand account of that run-in. Hi, Maritime, what do you have for us?
Ladies, what I will be showing you is how China used its helicopter to harass BFAR personnel who were conducting a joint maritime research near Pag-asa Island. In a video released by BFAR, a People's Liberation Army Navy helicopter with tail number 57 was seen hovering above Sandy Cay 3 and 4. The helicopter was monitoring the activity of the research team from the Bureau, the UP Institute of Biology, and National Fisheries Research and Development Institute. According to BFAR, the researchers were buffeted by the helicopter's rotor downwash for about 10 minutes.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
Some of the scientists and BFAR crew sustained minor injuries such as cuts and scratches due to the strong wind and debris from the continuous hovering. A BFAR crew manning the underwater drone almost drowned as he could not come out of the water due to the strong current generated by the helicopter. Some were also pushed back the rubber boat by the strong wind. Due to the dangerous actions, the research team was forced to retreat to the sheltered port on Pag-asa Island. Their mission to inspect the marine biodiversity of Sandy Cay 3 and 4 unfinished. They initially inspected Sandy Cay 1 and 2 last Thursday. There, experts saw that the natural resources around Pag-asa Island were gradually dying. Marine scientists also confirmed that the crushed corals on the sandbar were not native species to the area. Signs also suggest that the crushed corals found there were possibly just dumped last September. Meanwhile, AFP Chief of Staff General Romeo Bronner personally visited the 3 Philippine Navy personnel who were injured in the water cannoning by the China Coast Guard. The 3 are confined inside the AFP Western Command headquarters in Puerto Princesa, Palawan. One of them suffered 5 stitches on the head after being hit directly by a water cannon. Because of the bravery and dedication to service shown by the 3, Bronner awarded them with medals. Ladies, General Bronner stressed that this is the most serious and aggressive action by China against Filipinos. However, the AFP cannot say whether China deliberately targeted the people inside the resupply ship during their water bombing. Nevertheless, this will not deter the Philippines as they continue its resupply mission at Ayungin Shoal. Ladies?
Thank you so much for that, Maritime.
Putting that into context, I was actually there also when the Chinese chopper appeared in day 1 of the marine exploration. And they say that it's because the Chinese ships cannot get close in shallow waters to these sandbars. And I actually witnessed the helicopter going around very, very near. But this one is extremely near. And it hovered around 10 minutes. In our case, it hovered around us for about 2 hours.
Oh, wow, that long.
Yes, and China actually said that they thwarted the marine exploration, which PCG Commodore Jay said, no,
it's not true.
It's not
a
true.
lie.
But it was postponed from being on Friday to Saturday, and that's when this incident happened.
But all in all, the Coast Guard has already said that the mission has been successfully completed and they were able to get the samples from the Sandy Cay. As well as, I think another thing that really irked me when I heard about the chopper was that it kicked up a lot of sand and corals from the shore and it hit our researchers.
So nasaktan din sila. Oo. Pero ano yun nga sinasabi nga na yung hindi raw native yung corals doon sa area.
So it could have been dumped there?
The scientists have yet to piece together where these corals actually came from.
Yeah, but
Kasi
the fear there nga is
identity. Ay, ano yun, may mga tawag dito,
DNA.
properties. May properties yung corals that are parang quite peculiar for the area. So that's what we have to wait for in the weeks to come.
I think
I'm
the
sure
fear
they want to be thorough about
Yes.
it.
And the fear there is, of course, na a lot of this coral was dredged from another place and dumped there as a prelude to more reclamation activities.
That is the allegation.
That is the fear, yes.
Well, China's rhetoric is also getting more aggressive. Earlier today, China's Foreign Affairs Assistant Minister Hua Chunying posted infographics accusing the Philippines of disrupting peace and stability in the disputed waters. Hua's posts were reported by the Chinese Embassy in Manila on their official Facebook page hours ago. Now let's take a closer look at that. China claims that they, quote, resolve differences through dialogue, maintain peace and stability, exercise restraint and goodwill, and send Coast Guard ships in response to disputes. On the other hand, they accuse the Philippines of breaking its commitments, playing victim after provocation, colluding with the United States to contain China, and deliberately stranding a frigate for 25 years. Now, at a press conference today, Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo was asked what to do about the fact that Beijing flat out refuses to honor the 2016 arbitration ruling. And here is what he answered.
China, as you mentioned, has on many occasions said they don't accept the arbitral award. All I can say is that the arbitral award is final and binding. And this has been reaffirmed by the international community. In fact, just most recently in this incident at the Ayungin Shoal, where China harassed and also prevented our ships from, tried to prevent our ships from resupplying our troops in Ayungin Shoal, we had messages of support from over 20 countries, governments, who clearly stated the importance of adhering to international law. So we are fully supported in that respect.
Well, Secretary Manalo is on point about that international support. Just today, India's External Affairs Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar came to visit, and there was talks during which both sides agreed to boost maritime cooperation. Manalo said the Philippines and India are having extensive discussions on defense and security cooperation. India already plays a key role in the AFP modernization program, and Manalo says that a dialogue scheduled for later this year will help them explore what more can be done.
Our countries have a shared interest in a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. The Minister and I have decided to accelerate our maritime cooperation with a planned maritime dialogue with India to be held in Manila following the successful Track 2 dialogue in September last year, which confirmed several promising areas for collaboration, especially in marine domain awareness, shipping and seafaring, search and rescue, law enforcement, and environmental protection. With regard to our defense and security cooperation, we see the defense industries of India continuing to play an important role in the AFP modernization program.
Well, incidentally, just last month, the Indian government also brought to Manila an entire business delegation in order to showcase its homegrown military technologies and equipment, and also to scope out possible defense industry tie-ups.
That sounds very promising to bolster maritime cooperation, right? We know that they've already offered loans for the AFP modernization program. So what more can be done? And that's going to be part of the dialogues later this year. I think that's going to be very interesting.
Right. I think they
India
also
is a
have
superpower
technology
too.
That's
Yeah.
right. They have a lot of technology. Remember when the COVID vaccine issue hit, we all relied on their vaccine
And India
sector.
is a high-tech company in
high-tech,
its own
yes.
right.
Oh, sabi nila kaya naman yung interest ng India dito is because pagka nasakop na yung South China Sea, Sila na yung next.
Sino yung next?
Grabe na.
Yun
Talk
yung-
about doomsday predictions.
Yun yung sinasabi nila because of trade, for one. That's gonna
So
be
that's
affected.
their interest.
That's
in the
their
matter.
interest,
Okay,
yes.
well,
Yun eh.
I doubt
Narinig
we'll
ko rin
ever get
yun.
the diplomat to say that, but that's an interesting
It's all on
theory.
Twitter. It's all on Twitter.
Coincidentally, a U.S. congressional delegation also went to the palace earlier today to pay a courtesy call on President Marcos, and they also expressed concern at this time about China's aggressiveness over in the West Philippine Sea. Now, to help us dissect all of these movements, we have tonight Jay Batongbacal. He's the director of the UP Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. Good evening, Jay. Good evening, Professor. Where are you? There you are. It's been a while. Good to see you again.
Yes, good evening to everybody and to everyone watching the show.
Thanks so much for making time
Yes,
for
it's
us
been a while.
and not going on holiday early because we need your expertise because there's a lot to talk about. Before we get to all the other things that we reported on, we wanted you to react to the posts that China's Vice Foreign Minister Hua Chunying posted today, which were reposted by the Chinese Embassy in Manila, by the way. And the first one I'm going to read out loud says, who has sovereignty over Ren'ai Jiao or Ayungin? They call it Ren'ai Jiao, of course. China has indisputable sovereignty over Nansha Kundao, including Ren'ai Jiao and the adjacent waters. This has been established in the long course of history and is consistent with international law, including the UN Charter. None of us are lawyers here. Professor Jay, please dissect it for us.
I think it's proper to call that legally as bovine excrement. That's completely untrue. Ayungin Shoal, or what they call Renai Reef, is a submerged part of the sea, and the sea traditionally has never been subject to claims of sovereignty. China is more than 1,100 miles or no, kilometers away from Renai Reef, that they call it, or Ayungin Shoal, and this is open water. So how can a country that far ever exercise sovereignty over this area? Besides, the extension of state sovereignty into the sea, meaning from their coast out to the seaward, is limited to 12 nautical miles. And China never played a role in the development of marine international law. So there's no way by which they can establish that they had sovereignty over this area for a long time, even if they claim to have been the first civilization here more than 2,000 or 5,000 years ago, whatever it is that their books say. So this is completely untrue.
Okay, Professor, when you say sovereignty, that means being within the 12 nautical miles of territorial sea, am I correct? That applies to the territorial sea.
That is the accepted means by which a state may have sovereignty over any part of the ocean. You have to measure a distance from the coast, and the standard right now is 12 nautical miles. And it has evolved a little bit because of the concept of baselines, but basically it's 12 nautical miles from your land territory. And here, obviously, China's land territory is very far away, more than 1,100 kilometers, as I mentioned.
Could it be because they occupied Subi Reef and are claiming 12 nautical miles around it?
No. Yes, no. It's not possible to do it from Subi Reef because Subi Reef is also very far away from Ayungin Shoal. I think it's more than, if I remember correctly, more than 100 nautical miles, I think. No? So it's impossible for them to be claiming that to be part of the territorial sea of any island feature, actually, because there are no nearby island features or high tide elevations, even just rocks. There are that are above water at high tide. There's none. And this is actually a factual finding of the 2016 South China Sea arbitration, where the tribunal examined the available information as of 2013, 2014. This was before all of this reclamation activity took place in the region. And they found that really, from all available data, including Chinese nautical charts and ours, Ayungin Shoal is a submerged portion of the sea, and therefore it can never be subjected any claim of territorial sovereignty. And that's why the tribunal then concluded that the only state that can possibly have any rights to Ayungin Shoal would be the Philippines, because it would then be part of its EEZ and continental shelf, which entitles the Philippines to the natural resources in that area, including the coral, the fisheries, any minerals, and whatever other economic resources there may be.
Speaking about the arbitration, the South China Sea arbitration was unilaterally initiated by the Philippines. This is what the second statement says, that the South China Sea arbitration was unilaterally initiated by the Philippines, focused on territorial issues not subject to UNCLOS. The arbitral tribunal exercised jurisdiction ultra vires, erred in applying the law, and violated the principle of state consent, UNCLOS, and general international law. Help us understand that, please.
Well, you can consider this as like food. It's baloney. The tribunal made it very clear on page 2, in fact, of the decision. It states very clearly that none of the tribunal's decisions in this award, I'm quoting it, I'm reading it to you, none of the tribunal's decisions in this award are dependent on a finding of sovereignty, nor should anything in this award be understood to imply a view with respect to questions of land sovereignty. So that's very clear, and that's in the opening pages of the arbitration award. So clearly this statement is a lie, an outright lie.
What does that mean, ultra vires, by the way? The arbitral tribunal exercised jurisdiction ultra vires.
Ultra vires is like it's beyond its powers, beyond its jurisdiction, which again is not true, because the jurisdiction of the tribunal is based on UNCLOS and the fact that states ratified UNCLOS and therefore committed to implement its provisions, including the dispute settlement provisions on which this arbitration was based. And China ratified the UNCLOS in 1996. No? So they cannot say that this is beyond the powers of the tribunal, because they signed on to the convention. They entered into an agreement, no? That expressly recognized the jurisdiction of these tribunals to settle disputes.
All right. Professor, let's move on to another slide that they posted on Facebook. It says, and I'm going to quote, who has repeatedly broken commitments, or again, who has repeatedly broken commitments. The Philippines promised to tow away ASAP, or ASAP, the warship grounded at the Ren Ai Chiao back in 1999, but has never honored its word. Instead, it has kept sending vessels carrying construction materials to the waters of the Ren Ai Chiao for reinforcement of the warship and permanent occupation of the reef. Your thoughts, Professor? I think we have lost. Are you still there?
You may be on
Professor?
mute, Professor.
This is like the part of a ship. It's called bunk. Okay? This is not true. There is no record. Even they cannot show any kind of record of any supposed promise on the part of the Philippines. And we've had several presidents, all extending all the way to Joseph Estrada, no? Clearly stating that they never entered into any such agreement. Okay? If there's anyone who has not been following promises and agreements, it's China, because on 23 March 1999, for example, Wang Yi, who is now the foreign minister, stated that the facilities on Mischief Reef were supposedly will remain civilian in character, no, and will be open to joint use. No? And look at what it is now. It's a full-blown military base. Even the establishment of Mischief Reef itself, the facilities there, their own documentary, which was broadcast in 2013, celebrates the fact that it was a covert operation deliberately undertaken by them through, basically through deception and stealth, no, to establish a new facility close to the Philippines. No? And they've also promised, for example, they signed on to the Declaration of Conduct that they will not change the status quo. Well, that's what they've been doing all this time. No? They created artificial islands, for example. What bigger change in the status quo can you expect? The Philippines, on the other hand, has always maintained our islands in their natural state and has minimized the impact of our presence there. The Philippines has maintained the BRP Sierra Madre since 1999 in that area. It's never touched. But China began interfering with our resupply there, starting initially in 2013 and now 2014, and now they're continuously doing it, no? And they've been forcing our fishermen away from our own waters. I mean, what kind of change in the status quo is that? It's certainly far more than anything we've ever done in the West Philippine Sea. So this is really totally contrary to the truth. No?
All right. One quick clarification, Professor / Attorney Jay. I read somewhere that, what if an island is reclaimed or a feature, not per se an island, like a shoal or a reef, once they dump and dredge and build an artificial island, will that then be allowed to generate a territorial sea? Or is it only what's God-given that we base upon? What can generate
no,
the
it's
territory?
it's only what's God given. No? It will never be allowed to generate an island because that would essentially allow states to expand their not only their territories but even their sea areas, no, the areas under their jurisdictions, simply by having the means to create more and more artificial islands. No, no part of the sea will be safe, no, from that kind of an activity. The South China Sea Tribunal again also expressly determined this, no, that the maritime entitlements or features in the sea can only be determined on the basis of their natural characteristics, not the artificial ones, such as these artificial islands that China built. So no matter how big your island is, your artificial island is, no, if it's constructed and manufactured, it was never really there, they will never be entitled to any of the maritime zones. No, you will not be allowed to claim absolute sovereignty on the basis of those artificial islands.
Professor, why do we have a vessel docked in Ayungin? What does that give us exactly? Does it mean that if we dock it there, that doesn't mean it's ours? Why do we have BRP Sierra Madre there in the first place?
Well, we go back to 1999, no? When China expanded the facilities on Mischief Reef. In 1995, it started as just a few small huts. But then they expanded it into a full-blown building with helipads and gun emplacements in 1999. The Philippines, as you know, 1999, we were a bit hard up there, of course, no, in terms of resources, especially for the armed forces. We had no external defense capability to speak of, no? So that was the only way by which we could establish some kind of presence and ability to monitor and surveil Chinese activity in that area, to actually ground a landing ship tank. No, that's what it's called, an LST. It's not a frigate. It's basically a cargo vessel for tanks. And we landed it on Ayungin Shoal in order to establish that monitoring and surveillance of what was going on in Mischief Reef, because it is actually the closest reef to Mischief Reef, no? I think around 25 nautical miles or something like that. And from there, also, our presence would deter any further incursions even closer to our shores.
Okay, Professor, I'd just like to clarify also another site of where harassment occurred, which is the Sandy case. But before we go there, let's go to Pag-asa Island first. Is it correct that the Pag-asa Island is not within the EEZ of the Philippines, but our claims there are because of or due to occupation?
Yes, that is correct, no? Pag-asa Island, I think, is about 225 nautical miles away, 215 to 220, depending on where you measure it from. And it is outside our exclusive economic zone, which extends only up to 200 nautical miles. And our sovereignty over Pag-asa is not based on the EEZ, because you cannot claim sovereignty on the basis of sovereign rights here. No, there's that principle in law where the spring cannot rise higher than the source. Our sovereignty has been established on Pag-asa because we have occupied it, no? And we have been in control over it for a very long time now, no? That's at least starting at least in the late 1960s, if I'm not mistaken. And we're still there.
Okay, so,
and we have been administering that area for a long time, no? Without any interference from any of the other countries prior to China's expansion now and its deployment now of its forces around it.
So Pag-asa Island being a rock and not really an island, does it generate a 12 nautical mile territorial sea?
I thought these are legal terms now. An island originally was a geographic term, but it has legal effects depending on the characteristics, no? And legally, it is the equivalent of a rock, meaning a feature above water at high tide that can generate only a territorial sea. No? So in that sense, in the purely legal sense, it is a rock.
Okay, one
And
quick
then
clarification.
But if it's still named an island, that doesn't change its name as an island because there are many other places in the world that are named islands, but they actually look like rocks. Or they're actually rocks, but they're called islands in the maps of those countries.
So it generates 12 nautical mile territorial sea.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Quick clarification also, Professor Jay. Right now, the marine researchers were there to collect samples. They suspect, and there have been lots of reports in the past, of course, of damage to reefs, shoals, these giant clamps, whatever. If they do find and prove that it was another country who did that, which court would or do we take this case? Where do we file a case?
Well, of course, the only tribunal now that would have that jurisdiction and on which you would probably try to latch the case on is a tribunal established in accordance with UNCLOS. And therefore, it would be another, what we call Annex 7 tribunal, no? An arbitral tribunal that is created for specific purposes in order to rule upon the interpretation and application of UNCLOS. No? And again, that's part of the dispute settlement provisions of UNCLOS, to which both the Philippines and China agreed to and ratified.
All right, I think we got a lot of clarification in there. We'll definitely get
Did you
in
have a
touch with you.
clarification? A last one, just very quickly.
Meron pa. Kasi yung coral reefs, the sandy case, what is the interest of China there? Because those are corals. There are allegations of reclamation. Does that mean, just to clear it out, does that mean if the Chinese occupy the sandy case, does that give them territorial sea?
Well, number one, Subi Reef does not have a territorial sea. That was one of the findings. And therefore, they're trying to establish a basis to claim territorial sea. And these sand keys started being visible above water at high tide only recently, I think, around 2013, 2014. They became very noticeable only after that, no? Especially after the reclamation activities. And it has been thought that maybe that's what they're trying to do in order to claim that Subi Reef has its own territorial sea. They're possibly building up these sand keys, no? So that is something to consider, no? And also a possible way by which they are trying to expand, no, their area that they're claiming, no. But for now, I think the purpose right now of their activities is simply to try to limit, no, our people on Pag-asa Island from even getting far from the island, no. It's in essence they're trying to shrink, they're trying to diminish the areas under
Right.
our control and administration in that place.
Right, right. So much more to talk about when it comes to this, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have tonight. We're going to have to leave that there. Thanks so much for making time for us. That was Jay Batongbacal, Director of the UP Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. Thanks, Professor.
Okay, time to pause for a very quick break. Right after that, the Finance Department is pushing for higher excise taxes on single-use plastics. The details when we return. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News.
We might soon have to pay more for plastic bags, but that is if Congress heeds the Finance Department's suggestion or call for higher excise taxes on single-use plastics. The DOF is pushing for a 100 peso excise tax on single-use plastic bags, subject to a 4% raise or annual indexation by the third year of implementation. The annual price adjustments will be determined by several factors, including inflation. The DOF says this measure could yield up to 31.5 billion pesos in government revenues from 2025 to 2028. According to the Finance Department, the money will be used to fund solid waste management programs of the Environment Department. Now, compared to other countries, the Philippines currently has one of the cheapest tax rates for single-use plastics at 40 centavos per bag. The World Bank says the Philippines is the third largest contributor to mismanaged plastic in the oceans at 750,000 metric tons per year. In 2022, Congress approved a bill imposing an excise tax of 100 pesos per kilogram for single-use plastics, or for kilogram of single-use plastics. A similar bill is still pending over at the Senate.
Another news. We're off to the holidays, but before that, ramdam nyo na ba yung init? Well, you're not alone because government officials were called to a meeting today to discuss the threat of El Nino and other weather systems. President Marcos led the sectoral meeting with concerned agencies and called for the creation of an online platform providing public information on weather hazards. The country is bracing for the full impact of El Nino, seen to hit in the next 2 months. The Department of Science and Technology says more provinces will likely experience drought conditions and dry spells by April. This means below normal rainfall for the affected areas. Meanwhile, Pag-asa has been recording dangerous heat index levels in Metro Manila and other cities across the country these past days. Now, what's bad is this is expected to go on in the coming weeks. Heat index ranging from 42 to 51 Celsius is considered dangerous and could lead to heat stroke and other similar problems. Officials are also bracing for reduced water supply from major dams. Water concessionaires are now implementing pressure management, while the use of deep wells is also being regulated.
Iniingatan din natin na gumamit ng deep well kasi kapag sobrang gamit ng tubig, may epekto sa ground, no? So, kaya minamanage muna kung kailan ito i-operate at binabantayan ng mabuti.
Now, after El Nino, something also to prepare for is the onset of La Nina this year. Pag-asa projects 13 to 16 cyclones this year, marking an increase from 11 storms in 2023. And given that La Nina warms waters close to the Philippines, cyclones could reach land faster.
Na during the last quarter of this year, possible po na medyo marami tayong bagyo. And usually, malapit po yung development ng mga bagyo. Therefore, yung preparation po natin medyo lumiliit po since yung mga chances po ng developing ng mga bagyo during La Nina, mas malapit sa ating kalupaan.
We're going to pause for a quick break right now, but right after that, we're speaking to SEIPI President Dan Lachica about U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's promise to help boost the local semiconductor industry. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here. Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. The Philippine semiconductor industry is in the spotlight these days. A week ago, Filipino and Czech business leaders signed 3 MOUs, one of which was between the Semiconductor and Electronics Industries in the Philippines Foundation, or SEIPI in short, and the Electrical and Electronic Association of the Czech Republic. Just before that, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was here talking about how the Philippines is a vital partner in the chip supply chain. And just a day before that, it was U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo who said she wanted to double semicon facilities here. To help us unpack all of these, we have with us in the studio tonight SEIPI President Dan Lachica. Good evening, Dan. Thanks for being with us here.
Good evening. Thanks
Welcome
for having
back.
me. Thank you.
So much interest in the semiconductor industry lately. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that there's been a global attention on this. As I just mentioned, we've had several cabinet-level U.S. secretaries come and talk about the importance of the semiconductor, the Philippines as part of that supply chain. What is going on, do you think?
Well, you might say it started back in November when the president made a trip to the U.S. for the APEC meetings, but on the side, we met with the Semiconductor Industry Association, and basically the president encouraged them to continue to invest in the back-end assembly, test, and packaging, but also explore moving up the value chain to integrated circuit design and also a semiconductor wafer fab. And then after that, we went to Prague a couple of weeks ago, and as was mentioned, we signed an MOU with the biggest electronics organization in the Czech Republic, basically to promote trade. They're not really, they do have one wafer fab there, but not so big that what we wanted to do was actually develop the relationship and promote trade, because not much trade going on between the Philippines and the Czech Republic. Then after that, Secretary Fred Pascual and I went to Brussels to look at the semiconductor wafer fab, because all this talk you hear about semiconductors and the chip business in the Philippines is centered around assembly, test, and packaging, which is our strength today. In fact, the $49 billion export we have, 70% of that is in semiconductors, which is really the chips. But we want to go up to the semiconductor wafer fab, which is actually the front end, which I used to do in Silicon Valley for 16 years. And so I think that's the path that we should take, and I'm glad that the President and Secretary Go and Secretary Pascual and even Secretary Solidum of the DOS, they're on the same page.
We actually have that chart showing that semiconductor and electronics exports are the top merchandise exports of the Philippines, 58.2%. According to PSA data, does that look accurate to you? You said it was $45 billion, right? In recent years, though, has that been growing significantly, or it's just been chugging along?
In 2022, we actually hit a record 49.6 or $49.3 billion, which is 62% of our commodity exports. But in 2023, we contracted by about 8% because of global conditions, recession, the geopolitical conditions, and all that. But while we predicted the flat growth this year, we're actually looking at the modest growth. In fact, if you look at the global trends, Q1 pretends, modest growth, about 5%, but hopefully we'll get back to the original growth pattern we have globally, maybe 5 to 6% in 2024.
Dan, I'm curious, how ready are we to move up the value chain and actually do or make these wafer chips? Are we that ready? How soon can we do it? Are people keen on investing? Are local Filipino businessmen keen on investing?
The jury's out. It's kind of half and half. When I came back in '96, I was asked, "Oh, let's build a wafer fab in the Philippines." Of course, having that experience under my belt, my first answer then was, "No way. Our power costs are too high. The logistics cost." But since then, I've changed my tune, not because we're not working on the operating costs, but really I don't see any, future for the electronics industry if we don't do this in terms of building a wafer fab. And why is that? earlier you were talking about the China threat. Well, it goes beyond just our shores. It also spills over to electronics because I'm probably one of the few people who think that China may eventually extend its influence over Taiwan physically or economically. The reality is Taiwan supplies 70% of the world's wafers, and we depend on Taiwan for the wafers we import to the Philippines and do the assembly, test, and packaging to ship our $49 billion exports, right? And so if that is disrupted, then we're in big trouble. The 3 million direct and indirect workers, the 62%, it's 62%, not 58%, will be at risk. And so when Secretary Raimondo talked about doubling the chips, semiconductor chips capacity in the Philippines, they're referring to assembly, test, and packaging, which is really getting the wafers, doing the assembly, test, and packaging, and shipping the integrated circuits. That's good. I mean, even the...
But you want more.
Well, we want to move up the value chain because, and when I say move up the value chain, it starts with integrated circuit design. We have excellent Filipino designers, and we have about 6 design companies here. And so what's missing is, because today these designs go to Taiwan for the prototype builds. And if we lose that capacity in Taiwan, then there goes our assembly, test, packaging business. So what we need, so you have the IC design here, you have the back-end assembly, test, and packaging. You have a big gap in between, the wafer fab, right? And so we have a proposal, and I'm glad that Secretary goes on the same page. In fact, he named the semiconductor industries among the top 5 industries prioritized by our government. And so what we hope to do, propose, is come up with a lab-scale wafer fab within the OSD, supported by DTI and, of course, even the legislators. And that will be able to provide us with a prototype capability for the integrated circuit design, but more importantly, to train our talent, our Filipino engineers, to get them ready for the bigger prospect of having a commercial wafer fab in the Philippines. And to do that, because you hear, the U.S. government talk about semiconductor supply chain security. Well, like I said, if we lose that security in Taiwan, then there goes our business. So what we want to do is minimize our dependence on Taiwan's wafers and build our own. And so that's what I've been trying to convince our government and whoever listens from the U.S. government, whether it's Secretary Raimondo or whoever, and redefine their idea of semiconductor supply chain security to include wafer fab. The CHIPS Act will allocate something like $500 million among 7 countries, and the Philippines will get a big chunk of that for energy worker upskilling and semiconductors. Unfortunately, it's in assembly, test, and packaging. So I'm trying to redirect.
How much would it cost to build a wafer fabrication facility?
It depends, because the most advanced technology, talking about 5 to 2 nanometers, would be about $15 to $20 billion. What we're proposing is a modest budget of $500 million for a prototype fab in the Philippines. Not the nano range, but maybe 1 to 5 microns. So that's a good start to get our feet wet and get our talent trained.
We're going to need 128,000 engineers. How many years till we fill that gap? Do we have enough?
That 128,000 would be for the whole industry. What we need is a critical mass for this wafer fab if we're going to grow that business. In fact, we were talking to this consultant from another country who's had this experience for startup fabs, and we're talking about the first batch of trainees of 30 engineers. So to get us started on this. But the nice thing about, when I say commercial wafer fab is for the Philippine government to talk to the U.S. government, to convince of the U.S. multinationals here to build a wafer fab. And I have actually 2 in mind.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is anyone interested in the Philippines as a wafer fabrication kind of like depot or destination?
No, and that's where I'm sorry, I'm just being candid. And that's where, the work needs to happen. That's why, I'm this passionate guy who keeps talking to everybody. Consider the
flat out
Philippines.
no?
Because the Philippines is known for our assembly, test, and packaging. In fact, if you talk to the expats here, and I've been telling government, we don't have to talk to them. We have to talk to the CEOs who make the decisions in investments and technology, right? So we have to convince them that that's the right thing to do. And these two companies, one of them, they've talked about a $1 billion investment, and they have the advanced assembly, test, and packaging operations. So, hopefully we can convince them through the CREATE Act and some subsidies from the U.S. government to consider the wafer fab in the Philippines. The other one already has IC design and assembly, test, and packaging. And like I said earlier, what's missing is the wafer fab, right? So I've got those two companies, and I'm sorry I can't mention their names, they're public companies, right? But the government knows, they know that I'm pitching for that. So let's see what happens,
Sorry, I don't think you're going to get the money because the CHIPS Act specifically incentivizes manufacturing in America, meaning they want to bring back manufacturing jobs. That was what President Biden specifically said, right?
Okay.
That's why they're laying out that money to bring back the jobs. And there are some parts of the supply chain that are still easier to outsource, ergo, that's where the Philippines come in. Assembly, testing, packaging, right? It's going to be a bit of a hard sell.
Let me explain how this works. They're onshoring wafer fab capacity. They're going to build wafers in the United States, right? When those wafers are built, they have to do the assembly, test, and packaging somewhere in the world. They're not going to onshore assembly, test, and packaging. That's the opportunity for the Philippines. When Secretary Raimondo said, we're going to double the capacity, that's what she means. Bring that to the Philippines. However, and that's what I've said, this is not an easy job. Remember, my tune 30 years ago said, you can't do it. But now I'm telling, let's do it. It's not a matter of nice to have, it's a matter of survival of our electronics industry.
Dan, who would be your biggest competitor when it comes to that? Who would people rather run to? Who would investors rather run to? Which country would they rather go to? And what is the Philippines as sort of like a biggest barrier to entry?
Vietnam. Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. They're very aggressive in pursuing wafer fabs and expanding the electronics businesses. One of the things that crippled us would be the CREATE law incentives rationalization, because we had a stable, incentive system after the income tax holiday. You have a 5% GIE, which I believe Secretary Recto and Secretary Go are talking about to hopefully restore that. Because when that happened, we saw a lot of capital flight. And that's why, they've, in fact, one company, when we spoke to the previous administration, Secretary of Finance, we told them that the country president said, if you do this, our $1 billion investment will not happen in the Philippines. True enough, it went to Vietnam.
I think I know which company this is.
It's a company that was visited recently.
That's right. Okay.
But I did say the name.
Yes, you did. So it isn't foreign ownership that's needed.
Oh yeah, that's good
Or
point.
it's also the fiscal regime that was upset
That-
by tax reform.
Yeah, we lost a lot of momentum there. But then again, we're regaining it with the measures taken by the government, the proactive approach, the trips to Europe and the U.S. to promote the country. I'm optimistic. So you said it's impossible. Let's see.
What do I know? I'm just a journalist. Last question.
Yeah.
You heard our reporting about China. Tensions are sky high at the moment. There's nearly every day there's an exchange of words on both sides. If it comes to the worst case scenario, how will the industry be impacted?
Well, we have to rely on, like I said earlier, I don't think it's just the Philippine Sea. I think there's a possibility, and that's my opinion, that our supply from Taiwan is at risk also. And that's why I'm practically begging the U.S. to redefine semiconductor supply chain security to include wafer fabs in the Philippines.
But Taiwan is still fairly independent at this point.
At this point, in fact, they built $1 billion facility also in the United States.
To say, do we rely on China, mainland China, for parts as well?
For raw materials, yes, about 30% of our raw materials. And so that's why, especially, this became, our vulnerability was magnified during COVID because we practically shut down our industry because of the dependence on China. So we have a localization and looking at alternate supply chains to figure out how to get those raw materials outside of China.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
The rest
so
of the world is doing that also.
Yeah.
That's true.
All
They were not shipping out raw
incredibly
materials.
intertwined. So here's hoping it doesn't come to that point. We're going to have to leave that there. Thanks so much for your candid insights
welcome.
tonight. Dan Lachica, President of SEIPI.
Right before we go, we have a little time. Our big story tonight is also from the United States. And it is this clip of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland, collapsing after a container ship crashed into one of its support beams, or support pillars rather. Initial reports indicate at least 20 people and over a dozen cars fell into the Patapsco River. Authorities fear mass casualties as rescuers rush to pull survivors out of the water.
At first look, you think the video was not real, no?
Yeah.
It's like
AI or like an action movie.
Yeah, but it's real. It's scary.
Yeah, well, I certainly
I
hope
think
the
search
water's
and
not
rescue
too
operations
cold.
are still ongoing.
Yeah, hope the water's not too cold, but it is pretty cold over
In
there.
Baltimore, that's right.
All right, that's it for the big story on this Tuesday night.
Makes me kind of scared to travel for the holidays as that begins, I think, tomorrow.
I
It's
think
half day.
rats are going to be your biggest and bed bugs.
Rats and traffic.
We are One News all sides all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.